Supply and demand is often the name of the game when it comes to the collectible market, particularly with action figures. And when a product shows any signs of stalling or slowing down, any toy company is bound to fall in certain tricks and strategies to play into that game. Some may argue that they could be called gimmicks to coerce the collector into some seriously harsh, as the kids like to say these days, FOMO. At the end of the day, McFarlane Toys with their DC Mutlverse brand is no different, and I wanted to take a look at some of their takes to get us to either double dip on a certain character or even pick up that figure that we wouldn't have otherwise looked at twice, and to figure out whether or not this is a viable strategy going forward in 2024. Let's start with probably one of the OGs of the gimmick that McFarlane ever came up with, the Gold Label Collection. And the reason for why that is because in a very ironic twist, I feel like they're probably the more consistent form of gimmicks, despite the fact that the gold label can literally be found in some of the most randomized forms of releases, whether they be retail exclusives, because sometimes you're going to find a specific gold label at a Target that you will simply not find at a Best Buy or at a Walmart. In fact, do Best Buys even get Walmart? I would probably say the outlier is Best Buy for some strange reason, but Walmart, Target, GameStop, of course McFarlane Toy Store's own exclusive website, as well as even Amazon and some of the fan channels out there like Big Bad Toy Store and Entertainment Earth, they're all going to have their own gold label exclusives. Now, what exactly kind of separates the gold label from other releases? Quite honestly, nothing really. You're still getting a very quintessential McFarlane figure, 7-inch, 22 points of articulation, general accessories, sometimes some varying more than others, the traditional trading card and base. And you can see right here some three key examples that kind of stood out to me, one from Target, one from Walmart, and one from McFarlane Toy Store's own website, with really unique characteristics. Often I feel like the gold label, I would say, is sometimes reserved for characters you would often not see get much more mass produced. Some of the figures that maybe McFarlane kind of throws a little bit of a bone to. I mean, you're not going to see a very general release for Catman or even Supergirl despite her classic attire. And when it comes to, like I said, the quality, it kind of varies. Eradicators and Supergirl, in my opinion, are not too bad, even though Supergirl, looking back at her, yes, the face sculpt is a little questionable as far as the paint applications, but I love the cloth cape. I love the fact that she comes with both a regular base as well as a flight base. But then you got Catman, who's so unique and so strange and out there that it would only work under a gold label release. But in terms of scrutiny and prestigious kind of allocation, there's really nothing crazy about the gold label actual label. It's similar to that of other brands whenever they release some kind of specific line, some sort of wave, whether it be clothing, perfume, soda, specific foods, anything, literally any corporation in America, whenever they release some kind of blank label, it's really just a very exclusive thing that gets touted out as this really fancy, prestigious thing. But when you really break it down to brass tacks, it's really kind of like the same thing that just only exists under that specific moniker. And McFarlane is really no different. And their gold label collection, despite the very fancy actual label you have plastered on the corner of the boxes, doesn't really have anything really going for it as far as the gold label when you really consider it. It's just a really fancy way of labeling some of these things. And sometimes they stretch even beyond just static figures. So it's almost like the gold label could be so many other figures, but some of those other figures in those specific kind of quote-unquote gimmicks cannot always be gold label. You know, it kind of goes one way, but not the other way, if that makes any kind of sense. So the gold label is really kind of pick and choosy, depending on who McFarlane decides to give it to. And sometimes McFarlane would even choose whether or not they want to keep some of these exclusive. You know, they're kind of self-explanatory. Sometimes they'll say that Supergirl will be available at your nearest Target retailer. Okay, pretty straightforward. It's a Target exclusive. You either find her on the website or you find her in store, point blank range. Same thing with Eradicator. Pretty much found at almost every Walmart. Your mileage may vary, and then sometimes it'll kind of appear on the website, but of course this is Walmart we're talking about. They're raggedy. Sometimes they're really tough as far as actually getting them to not only stock this guy at your nearest Walmart, but even put him up on the website. And then Catman was readily available on the McFarlane Toys store website to be able to ship day and date, depending on when it got released or how many units they managed to manufacture. Until McFarlane decides to say screw all that and make them available on their own website. Sometimes you're going to have some retail exclusives I would say often is the case with certain Target releases, that they'll say, we probably made a few too many, let's release them on our own website. And so sometimes they'll be exclusive, sometimes they won't be. It's really a luck of the draw. But frankly, I feel like that's no more of a gamble than the Platinum Editions, which is basically a very fancy label for McFarlane's take on like the repaint variants, those very chase variants, those very specific versions of a priorly released figure that got a much more wide release, but this time it's got a very kooky, very out there sort of decal going for it, a very specific colorway that may or may not float your boat, only with a McFarlane Platinum label sticker stamped right there on the front to indicate that this is exactly a chase, which wasn't necessarily always the case. The Platinum Edition wave was always something very unique as far as the transformative nature it had over the years. I distinctly remember finding a couple of chases in my local Target back in like 2021, early 2022, and thinking to myself, oh, this is special. It's got that McFarlane Platinum sticker. Awesome, I should pick it up. Only to realize that it's really just an unpainted figure I had already owned, and it's simply just called Chase because of its rarity. And outside of that, it only really favors people that like to do like custom jobs. They like to pick up that figure and maybe paint it for themselves. But outside of that, you'll get an occasional really grayed out Dark Knight Returns Batman or a really bronzed out Robin from that exact same wave that just, again, happens to have the McFarlane Platinum Edition sticker stamped onto it. And then eventually they kind of phased that out. I really don't see it too much these days. And now it's gotten to the point of simply just being repaint variants, something that's not necessarily exclusive to McFarlane. This is literally a widespread toy thing, the toy company thing, that practically every competitor, every player in the game really does it. Mattel, Hasbro, Spin Master, you name it. They have all done it. They're going to continue to do it. And McFarlane is no different. And similar to the gold label, it really depends on who McFarlane decides to give the Platinum Edition treatment to. Here I have just one example, which is the Brainiac from Injustice 2, and this is probably not necessarily the best example because you can see that the colorway is drastically different. And that's probably where we get into some muddy waters with the Platinum Edition, because there's going to be certain entries that really become incredibly subjective as far as which one you really do prefer. The only objective thing, the very certifiable truth, is that the Platinum Edition is going to have a very distinct colorway, the color palette from the original version, but which one you really do prefer, it really just boils down to the collector. In this specific case, it's a very unique case where if you were to ask me which one I would display proudly on my shelf, I would actually go for the original Injustice 2 Brainiac, because that's the more faithful look. That's the look that I instantly think of when I think of the character of Brainiac in literally any interpretation. Not just Injustice 2 the video game, but Teen Titans, any of the comic interpretations. He's green with a little bit of the purple accents, but overall a grayed out suit. But over here, we have a take that is just so out there with the glossy metallic like purple and the baby bluish light aqua blue in the middle of the torso, and then the green is just so saturated that I gotta be honest, I thought this thing was incredibly fugly when he first arrived, but over time I thought to myself, you know what, it's kind of warming up to me the same way that really very gaudy blue and gray Batman from Hot Toys, the 100th anniversary WB, whatever the hell that thing was called, Dark Knight Batman, came out from Hot Toys. And people who initially thought that it was ugly, finally got it in hand and thought to themselves, you know what? This color is just so out there that it kind of just swung back around. The pendulum just literally swung a full 360 back to getting some of those collectors to actually love it. And I feel like I'm in a similar camp with this really rather campy Injustice 2 Brainiac, that it actually kind of became a little bit of a slight grail in my personal collection that I almost don't really feel like I want to break it out of its plastic prison and see exactly how far it goes as a Chase Platinum. But then you're going to have situations where the Platinum really is in fact better than the original. Here we have the two steels, which are going to be some of the more questionable figure releases out of this year, because I actually made a vertical short on this guy because he's not Batman's, but he is still a McFarlane that I managed to acquire. So I figured to myself, let me do a shorts video, a shorts vertical review, 1 minute quick little take on the figure itself. And I thought to myself that this figure, personally, I feel has that rushed quality that just doesn't feel all that great in hand. Plus, my biggest detriment about the figure is the paint apps. I feel like they're very splotchy, very messy. I understand that they were trying to go for this vibe, this feeling like he's made out of this very alloy-like metal, and that's why he's called steel. But personally, I feel like it didn't really translate very well in figure form, because you have all these like chippings and splotchiness that, again, might have been intentional by design, but it just doesn't look all that visually appealing to me, which is why the platinum that arrived in the mail actually is able to kind of pull back a little bit on that splotchiness. And you can very distinctly see on some of those areas, specifically around the gauntlets, the belt area, the crotch metallic, very garish piece, as well as all of that sculpting going around the shin area, that armor plating that I personally really do like from a conceptualizing stage. But this time it got kind of whited out with this very straightforward gray paint without any of those splotchy effects. That just works a whole lot better from a figure standpoint. Even though you still have a couple of those little splotches, little mini divots here and there on the much more darker areas like the thighs and the arms. But overall, it's reined in. It doesn't look as all over the place, and to me it feels much more uniformal, even though it's not having the red cape like the original, because obviously I love red, so I love red capes, and I think it goes a long way to make sure that this is a character that's pulled from the Superman mythology for him to have the red cape. So we're losing that and we're getting just a very straightforward gray cape, but again, the uniformity just works much better on the platinum. But again, your mileage may vary. There's going to be some other characters that are going to look a little bit better on the platinum, and then there's others that are going to do it vice versa. So David, why did you go ahead and get the platinum edition and you got the original steel anyways? And similar thing for that Injustice 2 Brainiac. Why did you go with all this, kind of very cumbersome process of acquiring both? That's because my dumbass did this thing that's also another little gimmick that McFarlane has kind of grown accustomed to doing on their social media platforms, specifically X or Twitter, which is called the EQL lotteries. Whatever the site is called, I can't remember the name of it right now, but basically it's a different outlet to be able to give folks a chance of winning a platinum edition should they not really feel the need to go out on the hunt, to go out to their local stores and try to find some of those platinum editions. So if you follow McFarlane Toys over on Twitter, ever so often they're going to do like these little lotteries that you enter to see if you get the chance to purchase a platinum edition. And frankly, I have done it for Brainiac, Steel, and then a couple of others you may or may not see in this video. And that's another little gimmick that McFarlane has done that sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't, because it really is another gamble, but at least I feel like you get a trade-off in knowing that you could simply just enter without having to leave your house, having to go through the hassle of hunting if you're not into that sort of thing. So there's variety there. There's an option there for folks that aren't as extroverted to go out on these hunts to spend the gas money. So I do kind of commend McFarlane to be able to give collectors that chance with the EQL lotteries. The only downside though is that if you do so happen to win, by default you get charged, and that thing is shipping. It's there for you to own. So if you end up changing your mind, or like what's happened to me a couple of times, if Amazon, who has been delaying your release, not just for Steel here, but even for another character that I'm going to be covering during the collector's edition portion of this video, manages to finally release and send out a figure that has been delayed weeks after weeks, even sometimes months, and you enter a lottery thinking to yourself you weren't going to get that original variant of the figure, only to then not only win the lottery, but also have Amazon ship out the original, so you end up getting stuck with both, then you end up making a video talking about McFarlane gimmicks. However, there is one constant with those lotteries, is that often those platinum editions that are offered through those lotteries, those randomized EQL entries that you can sign up for, like I said, through their social media platforms, they often end up being those repainted variants. So if you're often looking for some kind of chase where you think that the repaint does look better than the original, then you're in luck. if you're trying to go for some of the more recent and really weirdly released platinum editions that end up being a whole other figure, I really don't think that the chances are going to be in your favor if you're simply waiting for some kind of lottery through the EQL system. And if you couldn't tell, I'm talking about some of those recent Dark Knight Trilogy releases where they're called platinum editions, but they're practically brand new figures, like the Catwoman that doesn't come with the Bat Pod, like the McFarlane Toy Store exclusive gold label, as I mentioned before, but it actually comes with completely new accessories, a remolded head sculpt with different hair. It's practically a whole new figure, but for some reason it gets the Platinum Edition sticker, so that's kind of weird. And I'm like, alright, then it's not a Platinum Edition. You might as well make that a wide release because there's going to be folks who are going to want that figure. Same thing for the Skydive Batman, where the Platinum Edition gets released as a chase out there in some random stores, most predominantly Target, but it's not the Skydive version because he doesn't come with the Sticky Bomb gun or the Sticky Bomb or the Christian Bale head. It's a standard cowled head with a wired cloth cape, which is sick. It's awesome, bang for your buck, but why release that as a Platinum Edition? And why give some extra stock over to outlets like Big Bad Toy Store that then charges almost double, 40 bucks? I'm sorry, but that distribution style needs to be overhauled. I greatly appreciate the EQL lottery system, but I would say if they're going to be doing that, give that outlet a chance for some collectors like myself who don't want to go through the extremities of going to different Targets, spending all this gas money. And so from the comfort of our own home, I want to have at least a chance, even if I lose, a chance at that Catwoman Platinum Edition that comes with those nice unique accessories, or that wired cape from that Skydive Batman. That would have been a nice thing to do, but instead, I either have to go out on the hunt or fork over twice as much for someone like Big Bad Toy Store who secretly dropped it and out of nowhere it was sold out practically. So there was really no chance there whatsoever. I would say that that's definitely a system that needs to be kind of overhauled. Speaking of those price hikes, here comes the Collector's Edition. This is actually a much newer gimmick that McFarlane kind of implemented pretty much last year. I think they kind of touched base on it in 2022, but finally it was last year where we've started to get these much more in retail stores. Again, mainly Target. I'm starting to sense a little bit of a Target bias with McFarlane, but also still available on the McFarlane Toy Store, as well as even GameStop and some other the fan channels that I mentioned before, like Big Bad Toy Store, Entertainment Earth, etc. And so here we have one very early example of the Collector's Edition, which is Abyss. And the reason for wanting to use him as the preliminary example is because the Collector's Edition wave was basically $30 a pop. And so we increased the hike from a standard figure that was initially $20 to maybe ever so often $22.99, $23.99. And then in the middle, we have either the Build-A-Figure waves figures, which are $24.99, but you get the included piece to then build a fifth figure later down the line when you collect all four, so you do get the added value there. Jumping up another $5 is the Collector's Edition. What exactly nets you for that extra $5? That's what kind of created a little bit of a controversy with McFarlane Toy collectors, because take Abyss here, for example. You get another 7-inch figure that's pretty decently sculpted and painted and etched out. I actually kind of warmed up to the figure after some time, but the reason for why I wanted to use him initially is because even though he's inherently not a bad figure, and he comes with a very sick scythe, tongue twister there, accessory, you then get the trading card, which is a little better printed with the kind of reflective platinum lettering happening on the back and the front, and the display stand for it, as well as the circular base. That's really about it. So I'm like, okay, you get the added margins of the box. It's wider. It's got, like I said, that prestigious chrome accents throughout the lettering and the lining of the box. Cool. It's wider. It's got this nicer shelf display presence to it. Outside of that, the extra $5 doesn't necessarily seem all that much. In fact, here's a little bit of a mini twist. I didn't get this at $30. I didn't get this at initial release. I got them for like $18 when it was on Black Friday sale this recent year, because that was the only reason for why I was going to fork over some money for this guy, because I personally didn't perceive it to be worth the $30 for what you're getting in return. And I feel like a lot of collectors did that initially, which is why there was an abundance of stock of this guy, as well as a number of the other entries in this initial wave. So those first couple of waves of the collector's edition really wasn't worth it in my opinion, and I feel like many other collectors felt the same way if the subreddit was anything to go by. So this is one of those areas where, yeah, McFarlane was kind of in their feels, a little comfortable there, and this is probably one of the few gimmicks that initially, at the very beginning, didn't 100% pan out. Swooping in to save the day are some of the unlikelier entries I didn't think I would be simply standing for through the collector's edition wave, and that's going to be our saviors, Captain Carrot and Wonder Woman. And here we have two very fine examples as to how to do the collector's edition wave right, because not only do you get the much fancier boxes with the wider margins, the chrome lettering and the lining throughout that makes this whole entry wave much more prestigious looking, but that's not really what stands out to me. No, it's not even the fancy bases that hold up trading cards either. It's the value, all right? Because if you're going to be forking over an extra $5, jumping over, practically leapfrogging over the tiers of the Build-A-Figure waves or the Page Punchers waves, which I even personally really like, you gotta supplement it with something that makes it all worth it. And both of these guys are worth it, because not only do you get two really solid, well-made figures, Wonder Woman with her classic outfit, very good looking physique. I think we all can kind of argue that this is one of the finer looking figures, but on top of that, great articulation. Same thing with Captain Carrot, very robust quality plastic behind the build of the suit. You can actually feel the texture throughout the yellow parts of his suit, as well as the fancy plating on the chest plate with the symbol, the carrots holding the cape together. They both feel like really solid figures in hand that makes you feel, yes, this is where the $30 is going. But then to add the nice little cherries on top are the accessories and the little details that really go the long way. For Wonder Woman, it's the inclusion of several different hands. You get 6 hands total. You get a sword, you get an axe, you get her iconic Wonder Woman Amazonian shield. You get, of course, the lasso of truth, which of course the quality may not be 100% there because it still feels just a little bit cheap. But in case you don't want to hold the lasso in any of her hands, she has that nice little hook on her waist to hold it, to then make sure that you can actually put as many of these accessories on her person as possible for display purposes. So technically, the lasso could go on that hook. One of her hands could hold the shield while the other one holds the sword or the axe. And again, going back to that posability, the articulation that she has, there's just so much replayability happening with her. Whereas Captain Carrot, not only do you have different hand accessories, great articulation, but a couple of those hand accessories have these nice, very charismatic personality traits like the pointing finger or the thumbs up finger. And then if the detail behind the head sculpt wasn't enough with the little like whiskers and the whited out eyes, those goddamn ears are articulated. You can move the ears. Come on, like I said, it's those nice, fine little details, those little touches that go the long way of making something like the collector's edition worth it. And I really want to see McFarlane extrapolate on that just a little more, making those little nuances happen that puts a smile on my face when I'm messing around with the figure and go, yep, this is why I spent the $30. And so far, I would say these are the blueprint, Wonder Woman and Captain Carrot. And I really want to see them take some of these details, take some of these accessory choices that really work for either of these characters, and put him into a really good looking Batman, because so far the only Batman, unless I'm wrong, the only Batman underneath the collector's edition is that Green Lantern one. I don't want to see a Green Lantern mishmash with Batman, yada yada. I want to see a very classic, very straightforward Batman, but with the added quality of the plastic, articulation, hand and gadget accessories that makes the whole package worth it. And Captain Carrot was so awesome that yes, when they announced an EQL lottery for the variant, I went and got it. Even though I preferred the original look, there's something really, really novel looking about that platinum that I just had to have an one to rock and then the other one to stock. Isn't that the excuse that us collectors come up with whenever we want to get a second one? And I can tell you this much, they're much better than the recent DC Direct revamps. I'm sorry, but I think I might get a little spicy here. I would gladly fork over $30 for any of these worthwhile collector's editions than these things, because even though Batman here is pretty serviceable with the amount of hand accessories and gadgets he comes with, as well as that base and the lenticular kind of frame of the show that is also tossed in there, a pretty novel concept, fine, it's pretty charming. But then you have releases like the Batgirl one where she's so tiny and frail that I'm like, $30 for this? And then going back to the original Condiment King wave, I literally have not purchased any figures from that specific wave. However, those collector's editions are available in virtually an awful lot of retailers, even brick and mortar stores that you can simply walk into, for those that want to spend a little bit extra on some prestigious stuff. What if not only do you want to spend a little extra, but go the extra mile of going on one of these fan channels and getting something much more exclusive? That's where some of these other entries in the gimmick portion of the video, the much more gimmicky stuff, comes into play. Case in point, we have the Red Hood New 52 Black and White Accent Edition as a Big Bad Toy Store 2024 exclusive, as you can see indicated here by the sticker. 7,400 pieces, limited edition. You got some fancy packaging. You can see right here that's very matted out with the matte black finish with the Red Hood symbol there. Of course, this being a very prestigious release gets donned with the gold label sticker right there on the corner. But outside of that, you get this really fancy packaging that makes it clear to those that were able to wake up at 9 in the morning for when the pre-orders were released at the Big Bad Toy Store website, make it worth it for them. Now, he was available for $30, so nothing crazy as far as price point, but you can damn well bet that the demand was through the roof for this guy. And this is really where, as a collector, you really need to pick and choose your battles very wisely, because there's going to be some characters that are worth going the extra mile for an accented version such as this, and then there's going to be others where it's like, okay, did you really need to spend that money? And guess what? There's no point in returning, otherwise you're going to be flipping it and you're going to be branded as a reseller. Can you really, feel comfortable with that? Thankfully, I can honestly say that I'm happy with this Red Hood release. Don't get it twisted, it's still in fact a gimmick by McFarlane's part, but I would say this is one of the few areas to do it right. It's an accented version of a previously released figure, only this time a little bit of extra attention to detail, not only on the packaging, like I mentioned before, where you have not only this nice look to the overall box, it's much better extended, but even on the back, you have some really clean artwork of Red Hood right there, and to kind of emulates that whole red and black and white accented look. It's predominantly black and white, except for the little red accents that he's got on the helmet and the bat symbol. And likewise, the figure is the exact same way. So inside, you'll see right here to kind of give it that much better collectability feel. Not only does he come with a much wider and fancier, quote-unquote, looking base with the Red Hood symbol there with the red paint on top of it, but you even have the trading card and the base to prop it up in a very fancy way if you ever want to do that in like a glass Detolf case or on a fancy shelf. But even the card itself doubles as a form of certificate of authenticity, which supposedly is also signed by Todd McFarlane himself. The figure itself, though, it's the exact same New 52 figure that was released a couple of years prior. Same articulation, same details, same buck overall. But I would argue that the paint applications, the actual quality of the plastic, the feel to him is a little nicer. It feels like they kind of reprinted a figure, so it's not like they had extra stock and they just slapped it in there and said, just re-release it. It sounds like they took the buck, the digital buck at least, the blueprints on their computers, and did in fact reprint one with new filament, new resin, and new printers that they probably have in factory, and gave it an extra coat as far as the paint applications on the bat symbol, the head sculpt, the helmet, the arms, but then still maintain the theme of having it be a black and white edition with red accents. So where he would otherwise have fleshy colors on his forearms, they're now grayed out. So he's overall just straight up grayscale with a couple of red accents. And out of all the characters out there, I would say Red Hood is probably one of the finer ways of doing this kind of release. And so far, they haven't really done too many of these style of releases. I happen to have the Red Hood one here, as you obviously can tell, but I would say that the only other ones that kind of have similar packaging and a similar kind of assembly to it and attention to detail like it would have to be the 85th anniversary release of Superman, as well as the I believe it was the San Diego Comic-Con release of Batman Nightfall, or Nightfall Batman. So that Nightfall Batman with that Nightfall costume, but this time he's got like this cel shading, shadowy kind of look to his overall paint applications that I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't like it when forced cel shading is happening on figures because they're figures, you're going to be moving them around, so it's almost like you're forced to like them a certain way. I simply just don't like that. It's one of the reasons for why I didn't get that original Condiment King release. But I say that that's probably so far the only releases that they have done with this kind of branding, this kind of packaged release. Out of all of them so far, the only one that seemed worth it to me was Red Hood, but I wouldn't mind if McFarlane were to do this again. What I wouldn't mind getting retired, however, would have to be this sketch edition release that they got going on. So as you can see right here, this is kind of similar to that of the Big Bad Toy Store exclusives, except I predominantly see these at Entertainment Earth. Ever so often, there's going to be a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive, and as you can see, they're also branded with the gold label, and they're meant to be like these limited edition takes on prior released figures, kind of like that Red Hood, only this time they give it a sketch look. And basically, it's borderline similar to those initial gold label chases where they were unpainted, only this time they give it this black and white sketch artist, almost kind of like old school, God, what was his name? I can't remember his name. Mike Mignola, basically the creator of Hellboy, that kind of art style, except just black and white, so with no color. So they kind of give it that sketch look, and I feel like for some of the characters or some of the McFarlane releases, it works, and then with others, it's literally in the most transparent fashion a gimmick. I appreciate the packaging. I actually really like that there's a window that lets you look at the figure, so in case you kind of want to keep it wrapped up in the cellophane, you can still bask in the glory of the figure itself, so you have a little bit of a windowed preview. It's similar to that of standard McFarlane Toy releases, but along with that, you get, of course, the propped up base, the added card with that new sketch look, and then the overall box is very thematic to that. As you can see at the bottom, it says authenticated, limited edition to 5,800 pieces, but as you rotate it around, you get that original art style that was on that card, only this time it's grayed out to make it look like it's part of a sketchbook or something, kind of harkening back to an awful lot of these comic artists' roots of conceptualizing their Batmen. And as you can see right there, you have very fancy packaging, very fine looking, and overall I would say that these are some of the releases are probably best left in box, but as you kind of open up the boxes, they'll still traditionally come with all the accessories you know them by, only this time, like I said before, grayscaled out. So here you're going to have the White Knight Batman with the original grappling hook, the Batarang, the grappling hook without the wiring, that way you can kind of pose it in a variety of ways, the propped up base, as well as the original circular base and the card. Outside of that, again, it works with some characters. I personally feel like White Knight is one of the ones that it worked best with because of that art style. He has a very unique design to the suit and even the body proportions with the very wide torso and chest, but then the really thin arms. There's something very unique about that look of Batman with the face that really, really works well with this overall concept of the sketch edition. But then when you get into the weeds of it to where you start releasing a few too many, like the Hazmat Batman and then the Todd McFarlane designed Batman that kind of looks okay with the sketch edition, but that Hazmat, it just looks like the same figure I already own like 3 times, only this time it's black and white with the sketch look. And I look at it and I go, yeah, this is probably the only one I probably kind of went a little trigger happy on getting these things because I thought they were going to be a little more rare, and now I'm like, I could have pared it down a little bit. Especially since even though they're touted as Entertainment Earth exclusives, if you know exactly where to look, especially at local comic shops, you're going to be able to find them very easily. And I feel like that's kind of a testament to how many units McFarlane really did decide to kind of put out there. And it's the abundance of all these units of the sketch edition that has me a little worried for something that is kind of happening with McFarlane right here as far as exclusivity with some things. And that is the concept of digital based products and digital releases, because with the sketch edition here, there were some variants out there that had like a Todd McFarlane autograph, and he was charging like an extra 10 or 20 bucks for some of these versions on Entertainment Earth or on even his personal McFarlane Toys store. But the autograph itself, even though he hand writes each autograph, it's a digital print, so it's not like he actually took an ink pen and kind of autographed the box itself. No, he kind of wrote it on a iPad, and it got then printed. It's almost like a secondhand signature, and I'm sorry, but I just personally do not like that. I feel like, I'm sorry, if you're gonna do an autograph, you might as well write it on the box and mail it out, for that extra 20 bucks. But instead, it's on an iPad, and then from there, they take it, and then they print it on the box, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I noticed that he was doing an awful lot of that with the Sketch Edition releases. And furthermore, it looks like he's doubling down an awful lot on the digital stuff with like NFT pushes and digital collectibles and even some digital Build-A-Figures where you're going to have some physical figures, but then they're going to come with these digital codes that have digital Build-A-Figure parts that you assemble either in-app or on the digital McFarlane Toys store digital website to then build a figure in there. And I'm not sure how I feel about that push. I'm not going to say it's a completely negative, terrible thing, and this is like the doom of physical I don't see that. I will be fair and honest and say that he's not going to completely do away with really fancy releases like Sketch Edition, because as overly abundant as he went with this Sketch Edition, it's still a novel concept. It's unique, points for trying. And then going back to what I was doing a little bit before with the collector's edition wave, or even the black and white with red accent, red hood release for Big Bad Toy Store, I want to see more of that. I'm just more so concerned about what this whole NFT thing that he is doing, which he does a very remarkable job of describing it, using analogies like, oh, well, you have a photo of your girlfriend or a photo of your kid on your phone, but you know that that's not your kid, but you still like that photo, right? Well, it's a similar thing. And I get the analogy. Every time you use that analogy, I get it. It doesn't fall on deaf ears, but I'm just more concerned with the slippery slope that there's probably going to be some figures that would have been sick, killer as physical releases, and then we see that digital logo on it and we're like, god damn it, that would have been sick as a plastic release. But with inflation, with how cost effective things are going, with how affected every company is becoming out there, not just McFarlane, but Hasbro, Mattel, even some of the more prestigious companies out there like Hot Toys, Figure Arts, Mayfix, etc. I'm scared that McFarlane is looking at NFT and digital releases and things like that as a very easy way out. Like I said, it's that slippery slope. But if he can just maintain the course of maybe keeping things kind of even right now, especially with Batman selling the way that he does, that could at least leverage the blow a little bit. And with McFarlane Toys turning 30 this exact year, I'm hoping that they take more risks, more chances on things such as this. This is the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh from Batman R.I.P. Blacklight Edition, which is technically speaking an Entertainment Earth exclusive. And so you can see right here, you got that, fancy packaging with a nice little matte black finish with some details and accents that are privy to that character, which I actually already covered on this channel before in a very unfond light, because in that review I actually stated that he kind of reminded me of like what it would be like if McDonald's were to have made a Batman figure, and I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of that figure in and of itself. But when they announced that there was going to be an Entertainment Earth exclusive that is a Blacklight Edition, which retroactively is not only a deal, a package deal that to me felt much more appealing, but it should also not be confused with their glow-in-the-dark series, because they do have some glow-in-the-dark figures that are like quintessential Gimmick figures. Glow-in-the-dark is probably one of the oldest tricks in the book for any toy company, down to goddamn kids meals where you have a glow-in-the-dark toy that you have to shine a light on or put it in sunlight, and then it'll glow in the dark when you turn off the lights. And their glow-in-the-dark figures are no different. I only happen to have one, and that is the Titan Joker from Arkham Asylum, because that's the one that to me looked like it took advantage more so of those glow-in-the-dark features because of the Titan ooze that's kind of coming out of his orifices. And on top of that, I got a glitched deal from Amazon. It's an Amazon Gold Label exclusive that was $10 off by accident, and then later they fixed the price, and I was like, oh, I'm actually gonna keep this. I'm actually gonna keep this because I'm saving $10 on it, and I thought that was pretty neat. But outside of that, I didn't see the appeal of glow in the dark. Did see the appeal, however, with the Blacklight edition, because this is that initial Zur-En-Arrh Batman, but this time they added this sort of filament to the plastic utilized on his color scheme, which is already bright and out there and outlandish all over the place already. On top of that, they packaged him with the traditional accessories that he comes with, the baseball bat with the nails inside of it, as well as the knife, and even a trading card with a little display base. But they threw in this much wider circular base that happens to have some assembly with it that will then develop into this full-blown blacklight base with 2 LED blacklights powered by 3 disc batteries each that actually comes included in the box. And you get to light the figure up with these 2 lights. You actually have working electronics happening within the box in and of itself. And this is all packaged for $30. Sure, the quality behind the lights themselves is not the best. In fact, they're a little finicky. I have to move the batteries inside of the compartment themselves to get them to actually properly work. And even though I appreciate the metal rods that are holding the lights in place, the rest of the whole assembly is just straightforward plastic, so you're not seeing anything terribly fancy, but at least you get all of that stuff included for $30. And even though it's an exclusive, so there's a little bit of, supply and demand trickery happening once again there, wasn't all that difficult to find, because even though he went completely sold out in Entertainment Earth, I was able to track it down via a local toy shop here in the Inland Empire area. And I just felt the need to at least own one. And I feel like out of all the characters, Zur-En-Arrh Batman was one of the better takes to take advantage of that blacklight functionality. And I want to see McFarlane do that not only much more frequently, but also with the right characters. Because I do know that technically they did it again, only with Mr. Freeze, and I gotta be honest, that looks like a very, very ugly character that I just personally just didn't think it was all that worth it to fork over another $30 for a Blacklight edition. But if they can really nail it down with a character that can take advantage of a light up feature such as this, I would greatly appreciate it. And while we're on the subject of light up features, what happened to simply just incorporating light up features into characters in and of themselves? There was a time where we had a gold label hazmat suit Batman, but it was a gold label variant that not only had some gunmetal brush finish to some of the pieces on his suit, but he came with a light up feature for his bat symbol, where you press the tank and his bat symbol would light up. And I thought that was dope. Yeah, you have to swap the batteries when they die out, but it's priced at the same cost as the standard figure, $20, and you get a light up feature. I gotta be honest, that was dope, but I know that probably cost McFarlane an arm and a leg. He probably did away with it because he just didn't think that it was worth it. It didn't sell enough, but still, it's difficult to not look at some of the NFT digital stuff and think a little less of that and more of this. And I know that gimmicks are commonplace for toy companies, and there's nothing inherently bad about them. Like bacteria or cholesterol, there's the good kind and then there's the bad kind. But knowing that they've done things like the light up features and the blacklight function before, and now seeing their push on digital collectibles, it's difficult for a McFarlane DC collector like myself to not feel just a little concerned. Do any of you feel a similar sentiment as to which McFarlane gimmicks should stay versus which ones should be put back up on the shelf? Are there any upcoming releases, both rumored and announced, that have a gimmick that has you feeling some type of way? Most definitely, I want to see more value packed into their collector's editions, as well as some really good page punchers lines that come with an extra comic and have that overall aesthetic that I really like for $25. And please, for the love of God, stop jokerizing shit!